Today on CityCast Portland, we're wrapping up this year's bumpy legislative session with OPB politics and government reporter Dirk Vanderhart. We're talking about what passed, what failed, and what could continue gumming up the process for years to come. It's Friday, June 30th. I'm lead producer John Notarianni with our esteemed host, Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about.
Just so I'm clear, do you guys post the videos of this?
No.
Okay. All right. Because like my whole situation.
Are you kidding me? You're going to be the cover. That's going to be like Friday Roundup with Dirk. And it's just going to look, he's been kidnapped. Will we negotiate with Dirk's captors?
And y'all look great. You look like you're in clean, well-lighted homes.
Tell me about the sun. Dirk, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay. All right. Dirk, John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Claudia.
Hey.
Hey. Well, I don't know if you guys know, but for the new listeners out there, before we jump in, by we, I mean me, normally ask just a really random question at the top. So people listening can tell like who's in the room, and also that we're a super serious show. So the question this week is a would you rather? And it is brought to us by Chef Chase over at Pastificio Loro, who has become basically my co-writer for these for these entire series of questions that I've done. Would you rather go on a Portlandia-style tour? It takes basically the entire weekend, so you have to go home and then come back. And it's going to go through all of the, like little landmarks that was shot all over Portland. Or you have to host your cousins, friends from out of town that are from like Southern California, and they think they understand what Portland's all about, and so they already have a list of laundry of things, and one of the things they really want to do is to get on the like beer trolley pedal thing, and they want to go through town and do like one of those brewery tours on that, and they just want to do a bunch of whack stuff that you're just like, God damn. But it's only going to be an afternoon, an evening possibly.
I think it depends on which cousin, because even given that itinerary, they're going to have vastly different friends. I'm going to take that though. I can make lemonade out of that. I don't have to I'm going to look stupid. I'll probably be going to Voodoo Donuts maybe twice.
Exactly. You're going to have to go to Voodoo Donuts. Yes.
That's an afternoon. I've been to Voodoo. I can live through that.
I think I'm going to go the other way. I think I'll take the Portlandia tour. And here's my thinking. Portlandia is obnoxious, but they did hit a lot of landmarks of places that are actually pretty cool. And I think that without the sort of campiness of the show itself, that'd probably be a pretty good Portland tour, and you'd be able to see some cool stuff. So yeah, I'm going on the Portlandia tour.
Dirk, what if it was all weekend?
I mean, again, I know you're a Californian, and I'm not going to suggest that all Californians are bad. I don't know. I mean, if it's all weekend, that probably changes it. But I also think I've never been on one of we see the brew cycles. They look really awful, and I've never been on one.
Dirk wants to be on that
they might be buzzing me around Mills End Park and all these really interesting historical hotspots. I personally don't know. I do not know.
I don't think that's where the brewery pedal tour is going, Dirk.
I just don't like to assume, Claudia.
Are you on Portlandia tour as well, Claudia?
Yeah, you didn't say.
I'm on Portlandia tour, and this is why I don't like talking to people I don't know for that long. Mm-hmm. And with a Portlandia tour, I can shrink and just smile and nod. And so it's more about my energy. Mm-hmm. And I think the question was phrased this way because I do have a cousin, and he's from Southern California, and I've complained. And so he's been what if your cousin's friends came over and you had to hang out with them, and not even your cousin, but them? And I'd just be like, no. Oh. I love my cousin. I just want to be known. I love my cousin. But yeah, and also I'm a terrible judgy person, as Dirk just pointed out. So, well, Dirk, thank you for playing.
Of course.
Yeah. You've been in Salem reporting on the entire 2023 legislative session. It's why you're here. You're like our man who just came back from war. You're going to tell us everything that happened. From your perspective, how did it go?
Oof. this is the thing I was saying on Sunday, right before they adjourned. It's like, okay, it's almost 5 on a Sunday, and now I need to encapsulate the entire session with my coverage, and it's been 6 months. I think it went like super scatterbrained, right? Like for the first 3 months, I was kind of bored. I mean, not bored. Like the process was working. Like the parties were getting along. They were passing meaningful legislation on housing. They were trying to do all these things to incite new semiconductor business in Oregon. Like there seemed to be this tacit agreement that the voters had decided that legislative walkouts weren't going to happen. They'd passed this ballot measure that basically said if you walk out, you can't run again. And that was going to be this guiding force of the session. And we were just going to get there. And we get to the halfway point and everything just flips. And, you know, the Dems are queuing up maybe they're more, I mean, not maybe, they're more controversial legislation. The Republicans bail. All of a sudden, everything is up in the air. There's hundreds of bills that could die. Like, will we pass a budget before the current budget runs out? Our state agency is going to run dry of funding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that got real interesting. And then it ends in this massive scramble. Like what started as a pretty by the book and maybe sort of slow session, for lack of a better word, became one of the more intense sessions I've covered. And I've been covering the Capitol since, I guess my first session was 2019.
I remember when the walkout first happened and we were looking at it being like, well, this is just for show. This is going to go on for like, 6 hours. And then they're going to come back and get back to business. But this is just, this is just sort of like a showy, not going to mean anything. Like
Surely.
We didn't think it was going to last for 24 hours, let alone the weeks and weeks and weeks that it actually went through.
And I will say this, one of the first days of session, I walked up to Senator Daniel Bonham. He's a Republican from Hood River. I found him in his office and we were chatting, and he said to me, like, I'm not, if they mess with us, I am going to walk. And I just kind of like, nodded and smiled at him, just thinking, sure, like this is not going to happen. We all know the jig is up on this.
You're like, there are laws in place.
And no, I mean, like,
there are laws in place, buddy.
I should not have doubted him because he was like a key, I would say he was one of the more adamant people that walked. He helped tie the Republicans who walked together and sort of keep them out. And he did it. I mean, it's just, no one expected it. And here we are.
Yeah. I also heard there was a lot of remodeling and so much construction noise to add to this like 24-hour, tension of a legislative session. I heard there was remodeling, there was construction noise, that people had a hard time finding communal spaces to work in. And like no one wanted to be in their offices or just in certain parts of the Capitol. And I'm just like, do you think people were just walking out because they're like, I don't want to work here anymore? Like after a while.
No. I will say this, Claudia. The Senate, for long stretches, especially in the colder months, like there was like, I think there was construction going right under them. So there would be these fumes that leached into the Senate. Plus it was so cold that Senate President Rob Wagner, like at one point gave every senator a fleece blanket for their desks. But there were people like complaining of their eyes watering in the Senate or getting like headaches after breathing in these fumes for a certain amount of time. So that was real. And yes, it was like extremely, extremely noisy because they are basically trying to make the Capitol one that won't immediately pancake into dust if an earthquake hits. Right. And we could all survive potentially, which I will say as someone who has spent long hours there, like that's appreciated.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even under the fleece blankets, a lot did ultimately get done, right? I mean, they passed 600 bills, even with this long stretch where nothing was getting done. I want to talk about a few of the big things that passed. I mean, at the start, the big news was the housing legislation that went through.
Right.
What was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, the governor made clear that housing was going to be her big thing, and the Dems in the legislature, who are her allies, definitely agreed. They did a lot. Like I think all told, they passed $2 billion in spending regarding housing. Most of that will be bonding for building affordable housing units, but they spent like $500 million, on rent stabilization, expanding shelter, helping homeless youth. doing all sorts of stuff, right? Like we found out midway through the session, or actually kind of late in session, there was a lot of money to spend, and Dems really pulled out all the stoppers, and Republicans agreed, but toward housing. And we also kind of changed land use laws in some ways that are going to be a bit pronounced. Like for the first time, cities like Portland are going to have to figure out how much housing they need, right? Because we have nowhere near enough housing. So they are going to figure out how much housing they need, what kinds of housing they need. And then there's going to be this committee, this group that sort of forces cities to build that housing. You can't just say, we're short this many thousand units, and that's what it is. Like there's going to have to be some mechanism that ostensibly forces that housing to be built. I don't know that we know how that works. I mean, frankly, Portland's having a really hard time building up its production right now for a lot of different reasons. And like, I don't know that someone sort of pressuring from on high. I don't know. I have some questions about how it'll work, but pretty remarkable.
What a huge first win. That's all. Just straight out of the gate. Everyone's like, yes, we're all bipartisan support. We're going to do this together. And it was like all hands up, holding hands,
I'm not sure I saw that, but yes.
Dirk, that's what I heard. I don't know. I mean, were you there? Were you there, Dirk? Because that's what I heard.
It was.
Yeah, the all legislative sing-along was really a moment that...
We are the world, just like going on. So there was that, Dirk. And then the other, I think, huge bipartisan home run was the gas bill, which is it went from like the most, everyone, this is something that's going to affect all of us too. I mean, I guess the gas bill as well, but it just felt so, and we're not going to be able to pump our own gas. And like, can you explain? All of the thinking, all of the late nights for...
There has not been a tweet or a topic I've tweeted on or really written about that has gotten this. I mean, frankly, this conversation is unhinged at this point. And just to back up, like for people listening, Oregon, folks listening probably know, like Oregon, most of Oregon, at least the heavily populated parts, you need to have an attendant pump your gas. That is an anachronism. It dates back to like the 50s. In the state law, there's all this like really weird language about what a danger it is to pump your own gas and how you're exposed to fumes and you could light yourself on fire and your baby might get stolen if you leave your car. And like really, there's just this deeply entrenched thing in Oregon. And so now we are talking about letting all gas stations have half their pumps be self-serve, which I will just say, I'm just going to state my biases. Like I grew up in Michigan. I grew up pumping my own gas. I've never had a problem with it. If anything, I'm a little annoyed sometimes when I have to wait. But anyway, the legislature finally, after all these years of debate, took this step, passed this bill. And yesterday we learned that Governor Tina Kotek isn't sold on it. And like she is not saying she's going to veto it. She's not really saying anything except for that she hasn't made up her mind. And she wants Oregonians to let her know how they feel, which if my tweet responses and inbox are any indication, like she's just gonna hear a bunch of like, I don't know. I mean, people really get worked up about this. I heard a very persuasive argument just today via email about how like this is something that makes Oregon, and you're in Oregon when you can't pump your own gas, and it's this like delightfully like modern society be damned. This is Oregon, and it's just interesting and kind of whimsical that we have this. And like, I'm not sure I buy it, but like it was stated so well to me. I was like, huh.
I never thought of. We should just add to the quaintness. We should have someone just churning butter on the corner. We should have just like someone like chucking cucumbers, making pickles, and just be like, here with your gas, pickles, and homemade butter. Let's go. Next one.
You've crossed the border. Here's your artisanal cheese platter as we pump your gas.
Exactly. Well, I wanted to talk about one last little bill that got tweaked on its way on everyone's way out was Measure 110. Just what was going around that? Like, did you hear it? I mean, did you know it was going to happen before it happened? Like,
so Measure 110, people should know, is Oregon's drug decriminalization policy passed in 2020. So now user amounts of drugs are not it's not a crime to possess those. There's a couple things that happened in Measure 110, actually. Like the bigger tweak, I think, was this kind of dull thing that helped the state more easily distribute money to services around the state. That's probably the most important thing. The one a lot of people are hearing about right now is this law that made fentanyl possession or certain amounts of fentanyl possession a misdemeanor. And actually, like, fentanyl is wreaking havoc right now in Oregon and around the country. But what this did, actually, I think there might be some misunderstanding, is it brought fentanyl on board with other drugs. So like heroin, if you have a gram up to a certain point, it's a misdemeanor. But if you have under a gram, it's a ticket, basically. Cocaine, very similar. Meth, very similar. Fentanyl didn't have that. It was either a ticket or you were facing a felony. But you could have a ton of fentanyl on you and not be facing any crime whatsoever. So what the legislature did here is like stake out that middle ground that other drugs have, where if you have this middling amount of fentanyl on you, it's like 5 to 24 pills. That is now a misdemeanor. So it actually just brought it in line with the other drugs. But the other thing we should talk about, like the citizens of Oregon do seem to be pretty concerned about Measure 110 right now. The polling is like 63% of folks would like to see criminal consequences return, even at like they want us to expand treating addiction like a health issue, which is Measure 110's big thing, but they also are kind of really worried about what's going on. So that is a larger conversation that I think we will keep having in this state about how we do this. The Democrats would say we just need to give it time and you're going to see some meaningful stuff happen. But like, we are not done. Just these tweaks, probably the beginning of the conversation more than a conclusion.
Yeah. And it's just so interesting to thinking about how this came through as a ballot initiative, as opposed to legislation that was done by the legislature itself. And I think that, citizens are sort of still wrapping their heads around what they actually bought when they voted for this.
I mean, the groups that most opposed Measure 110 were like the addiction services groups that were like, this is not going to work. Like, so I don't know.
Yeah. That's telling.
There are a lot of people that adamantly believe that this will be a game changer when we get the ability to help people.
The infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Because this was a big cart before the horse type situation where we're just like, hey, what if we stop criminalizing addicts? And that was it. Yay! And then there was nothing else that thought through, and it's like, okay, but they're addicts. Are they going to get help? Sure.
Yeah.
So now we're trying to get that horse back in front of the cart, and it's taking a while.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the cart's been moving along down the road, and the horses
creating open air fentanyl markets. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's talk about some other things that didn't go according to plan in this legislative session. I think the big thing that caught a lot of attention was just how screwed up a couple bills that were central to the Republican walkout got sort of screwed up. Big bills on gun safety, some sort of healthcare bills looking at transgender healthcare access, abortion access, did ultimately go through, but had to change. Democrats had said that they weren't going to change them, and at the end they ended up backing down, I guess. What happened there, Dirk?
Yeah. So two big bills, House Bill 2002 and 2005. The Dems brought these out and they said, we were elected last year. It could have been a hard year for us. In fact, the Oregon voters sent us back into the majority and we have this mandate. We're going to pass gun control. We're going to pass abortion protections and gender affirming care protections. And by the way, you guys can't walk out because you'll be giving up your political careers. And it didn't turn out that way, as we've discussed.
How do they screw that up? I'm just sorry, but like, how do the Dems keep screwing this up?
So let's get to that in a second. But
I know, no, totally, no. It's just so frustrating here every year. Go on.
I'm seeing like 6 months of frustration on Dirk's face right now. He's like rubbing his face as he relives all of this.
I mean, just to walk people through the mechanics, like the abortion bill, just to simplify it. I mean, what Republicans really hated about that is it would have allowed children of any age to receive an abortion without parental notification. Now, it's very, very rare for a child under 15, for instance, to get an abortion. The concern from Democrats was that if they need an abortion, there's a possible abuse situation there in the home. It's probably not in the best interest to include the parents. The Republicans were saying, but what if it's not that? And like, we just really think the parents should be involved. Obviously, there's a parental rights fight happening in the larger culture nationally. So that was their big concern on that. They wound up getting Dems to agree to bring back a parental notification requirement. So parents do need to be notified if a kid under 15 has an abortion, but that can change if healthcare providers decide that this is an abusive situation or there are real concerns here. So I think both sides kind of got what they wanted on that.
Right.
Actually, like, and Dems did to a couple other things. There were some provisions that would have expanded access in rural areas and in universities, some other things that they backed off of. But the Democrats would argue they got a lot of what they wanted. And John, you mentioned transgender care. That all stayed in place. They were very adamant about that. So the bigger concessions, I think, were on gun control, where the Democrats wanted to raise the age from 18 to 21 to own most guns. And they wanted to make it easier to ban guns in public buildings and cities. They backed off both of those provisions in exchange to get Republicans back. But they did succeed in getting one measure through, which would ban ghost guns. These guns that, like, sometimes they're 3D printed, other times you're making them as part of a kit, but they don't have serial numbers and they're untraceable. So they did that. And, you know, the Dems would, so you can look at that a couple ways, right? The Democrats would urge their base to look at that as, look what we did, you know, transgender protections. We got some of these things, that abortion that we wanted. We got this ghost gun bill that had been in the works for 4 years or whatever. And then, like, some people be like, but look at what you didn't do and how did you cave? And maybe this is kind of what Claudia's talking about, is like,
I mean, but we did think, okay, this walkout happened. The Democrats are like, we are absolutely not going to cave.
That's what I'm talking about.
And it went on forever. I mean, do you think that, and I think a lot of people are like, what the hell? Why did you give up at the last minute? Like, you had this, Dems. Are we putting too much emphasis on the compromise that actually happened?
No, I mean, they were beaten. Like it was a game of brinksmanship where, like, it became more and more evident that the Republicans were not going to blink, or it certainly didn't seem like it. And, like, there was a trade-off for that. As I mentioned, there are 10 senators who very well might have given up their legislative careers because of this. We are still waiting to sort of get clarity on how this measure that would do that works. But, like, very likely they are done being legislators for a while, if not forever. And so that's the price they paid. But the Dems were beaten. And it's because at bottom, like, our Constitution contains this quorum requirement that says you need 2/3 of people there. The Dems tried to fix it with this weird, convoluted penalty system when really they should have just been trying to make it a simple majority like both states.
Yeah, change the quorum. Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, Dirk, I feel like the Dems got what they wanted at the end, right? But the one that I'm like, I wish something better could have come of this was the campaign finance bills. Like,
right.
I just feel like that was a missed opportunity.
You know, Claudia, it's been a missed opportunity for a couple decades. I mean, like, it's always a missed opportunity. And
I've just missed it again.
Every year Democrats come in and they say campaign finance. Like, there had been some sticking points. There was a Supreme Court decision that created real difficulty for implementing campaign contribution limits. That is now over. We amended the Constitution to explicitly allow campaign contribution limits in 2020. There's no question we can do it. And now the problem is that the legislature just can't find an agreement. Like, it's such an interesting, nuanced, and maddening fight within the Capitol that prevents even Democrats from seeing eye to eye. But it just gets down to the details. Like, everyone in that building got there through our current campaign finance system. They have a vested interest. They know how to win on this system. Yeah. The interest groups know how to use the system to their ends. And so whenever you talk about changing it and maybe creating winners and losers, you know, relatively, it gets really, really fraught, really hard. And that's why we haven't been able to see any agreement into, like, what should pass. And it's just not clear that we will. And what that might mean, and sorry to be soliloquizing here, but what that might mean is that we get a ballot measure that some advocacy group puts forward. And it'll be like, maybe like a Measure 110 style thing where people are like, this sounds great. And then in practice, things get real, real messy.
Well, let's take a quick break and then dig in a little bit more on that mess.
So let's talk about the drama. I mean, we've been talking about the drama, but let's, like, really go into the drama.
I just feel like, where do we go from here?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Where do we go from here? You know, we passed a law saying that walkouts can't happen and gum up a legislature, and immediately in the next session, the same thing happens. Like, what next?
It's gonna. I mean, the Democrats are talking about trying now to do what they should have done if they were trying to accomplish no walkouts, which is try to change the quorum.
Mhm.
I think that some people still hope that when all the dust clears from this walkout and people see that there are real, I mean, like let's assume that this measure that could prevent people from running for reelection holds up in court. It does what folks thought it would do, and now these people are sent packing from office. Like there is a contingent of folks that believe or hope that Republicans or the minority party will see there's consequences for a walkout and probably won't do it in the future. But it's just untested right now. I think maybe more likely as we have an actual discussion about quorum and whether or not the state's laws need to change, and that would put an end to it for good. But there are trade-offs there too, and I think the Democrats might be in the minority again in someday, and they would be facing the same frustrations that the Republicans are right now. And there is some, I think, folks that are aware of that, and maybe
That's why they're afraid of. Yeah, that
no,
makes
I
a
don't.
lot
I
of
mean, I
sense.
don't want to. You hear that, but like I'm sure it's not widespread. I think someone's going to take a shot at the quorum rules.
Yeah. But I mean, the Democrats are not in the minority. The Democrats pretty much run Oregon, and yet they can't run Oregon, and that's very frustrating as an outsider who's hoping they do. So, I mean, how does that? Do you think that everyone left triumphant? They're like, we did it again, guys.
No,
Woo!
but I also think that I kind of think you're over dramatizing this. Like they can't run Oregon. Like they did a lot. I mean, like the majority party got its way the vast majority of the time
Yeah.
here. Like there were these really big sticking points that are big cultural fights, and they had to they had to make some concessions to get those through. But like end of the day, like all their big bills or most of their big bills passed in this insane last 8 days.
Mhm.
So I think to say that they can't run Oregon is probably not quite right.
The thing that sort of like sticks in my jaw is just that by slowing down the legislative process for so long and having these 6 weeks where these negotiations aren't happening, where these sessions aren't being held in the Senate, a lot of work on bills that could have refined some of these things, that could have gotten to better compromises, didn't happen. And like, whether or not you agree with the politics of a walkout or what passed or the culture issues or anything, I think that like the process of creating laws is important, and to not do that, we are still shortchanging ourselves by sort of freezing progress that should have happened and that could have led to a more nuanced set of laws going into place, as opposed to just freezing everything and pushing it all through at the end.
It is very unsettling in sometimes to see these like end of session sprints where you're pushing 400 bills through in 8 days or whatever, because they're not talking about this stuff. I mean, here's the thing, John. There were actually committee hearings going on during this walkout in a way that we've not seen in past walkouts, because the Republicans were actually just hanging around the Capitol.
They didn't all flee to Idaho this time, yeah.
Wait, they didn't go home? They were just hanging out outside like high school kids who graduated but didn't
in years past, they would flee the Capitol because they were worried that the governor was going to send the state police after them. But the Dems made clear they weren't going to do that this time. So they just kind of hung. They were in their offices. All they did was make sure that they weren't in the Capitol when like the Senate was going to conduct floor session, because if they were doing that, then they could be forced into the Senate chamber and they would have to provide a quorum. But once the Senate was adjourned for the day, they could just kind of hang out. They were attending committee hearings. Like to an extent, they were having some of these discussions, John. But no one would argue that the process of the last week or so was like good.
Yeah. How are you feeling, Dirk, about all of this? You seem I mean, you go in every year, like what are there any silver linings? Because I'm already kind of losing hope. Like towards the end, I'm just like, I don't know if I could do what you do, Dirk. I would just be so just like, why? Why is everyone get out of your chamber? Come over. Like, what is going on? And you're seeing it all, and you're just sitting there, and you're just, under that fleece blanket, just like, what is going on?
Did you get a fleece blanket?
No,
Dirk?
I didn't.
Oh,
unfortunately. But like my role is not your role, right? Like I'm here, I'm there to like figure out what's going through the building. Like observe it and report on what's going on. I'm not sitting there with rooting interests and like, what are you doing, Dems? Or like, Republicans should be going harder. Like, I just try to figure out who's feeling what. But I will say this, like, you're right. Like, things are not headed in a positive direction in Oregon. Things are not headed in a positive direction nationally. Like, we are in trouble in terms of the various parties finding their ways to their own corners and sort of duking it out from there. And like, everyone will always talk about the Oregon way and how it didn't used to be like that, but it is. I mean, it's getting that way more and more. And so like, I don't know about a silver lining. I mean, I think you are right to worry about the effects of this session bleeding over, especially for next year, because like, even if these lawmakers that walked out are ultimately banned from running for re-election, they will be around next year, and they have very little to lose if another fight happens. And you know, I want to be fair here, because one critique of the political press, like, what it's such a cliche in Salem that people say 90% of bills are bipartisan, and it's true, like, but 90% of bills are extremely boring. Like, a lot of them are technical fixes or just things that like are so dull or common sense that they don't even necessarily warrant attention. And it really is like a lot of the bigger, meatier, more consequential stuff that does get some of these larger debates. And that's part of the reason why we talk about it. You know, it's not just like they're fighting over this really stupid bill about whatever, like, and just because they're fighting, we're going to write about it. It's like a lot of these bills are important.
And they're things that people care about. There are things that are very, very central to a lot of people's lives. That's why they're controversial.
Right. I'm just happy I'm not commuting to Salem every day.
Oh, God, I know. But you know what, though? That does bring, every time you were just like, yeah, they're just hanging around. I'm just like, I want to know what restaurant all the Republicans were hanging out in. Like when there was something on the Senate, like where did they all go? You know, they all had to go somewhere. And I wish that there was like a little camera there, because I just want to know what was going on.
I think that's like, I think I smell an investigative podcast. Like, this thing gets a spinoff, and it's just you.
It's just staking out every Denny's in Salem, Oregon.
Where did they go? I love it. This is a great idea.
10 diners to go to when you're shirking your legislative responsibilities.
I love it. Awesome. Well, Dirk, seriously, it was so wonderful to have you. I hope that you come back again. Like, I miss you. We all, I mean, just show me cards. We all have worked together.
Yeah.
And I've always enjoyed Dirk, because Dirk gives me shit in a way that no one else does. And I really love it.
We also used to be neighbors, and like none of those things are true anymore. So that's
I know.
sad. But yeah, you know, it's great talking to y'all, and nice seeing you too.
Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate us, or leave us a review? Our host is Claudia Meza. Our audio producers this week are Julia Fiaioni and Lizzie Goldsmith. Our newsletter editors this week are Rachel Monahan and Adrian Gonzalez. I'm the show's lead producer, John Notarianni. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.